Hello and welcome to week 4 of our 5 weeks in the book of Esther. I think we've had quite a useful study so far, and we've learnt quite a lot, and we come to another dramatic chapter. So we're in chapter 7, but we're starting on the verse before, from chapter 6, verse 14. And so this is after the day where Haman has had a really hard time. The king has been honouring Mordecai, and it's been a really embarrassing and humiliating day for Haman, who's really annoyed at Mordecai already, but was even more annoyed now. And so he comes back from this dreadful day back home, and his wife and his advisors are there. And he's just telling them just how bad this all is, that he's having to honour Mordecai, who should, in Haman's mind, have been bowing down to Haman. Haman is now having to honour Mordecai, and he's far from amused. He's furious with the whole thing. And they come up with the solution that you should just get Mordecai done away with. And having made that decision, just as the decision had been made, the staff from the palace arrived to escort Haman to the banquet, the second banquet that Esther has arranged for the king and Haman. And so I guess in Haman's mind that that was all done and dusted, and he just needed to put Mordecai out of his mind and get on with looking after his own career and his own position, and to remind himself that he was very honoured that he was going to go for the second time and have a banquet with just the king and the queen and Haman, and this is what his life was all about, his self and grandness. So he was working hard to put it all behind him. So he comes to the banquet, and as part of the banquet, in the conversation of the banquet, the king asks Esther for the third time, "What is it I can do for you?" I remember all the way back to the first time when Esther came into the inner court, not knowing whether the king would welcome her or not. And the king held out the scepter and acknowledged her presence and invited her forward and said, "What can I do for you?" And that was the first time. And then Esther says, "I'd like you and Haman to come to the banquet." And so the king and him went to the first banquet, and he asks the question again, "What can I do for you?" And she said, "I want to come to another banquet." And this is the second banquet and the third question. And a lot has happened in between, in the intervening chapters. And so here we are. And at last, the time seems to be right. The time is right for Esther to speak out to the king and to explain how upset she is that her people, the Jews, are going to be annihilated. And this is perhaps the moment that the king and Haman both discover that Esther is in fact a Jew. And it's interesting that when the story is unpacked for the king throws his goblet to the wall and goes out into the garden, and we don't know what he's thinking about, how he's planning here. He's promised to Esther that she can have half the kingdom. What is it you want, queen? And you can have it. And what she's asking for is for the salvation of her people. And so perhaps he's out thinking, how does this work? Because Haman is, has become my favourite in my court. Has become number 2, and then when he comes back in again, he comes across this scene where Haman is bowing down, is kneeling down to Esther. He's pleading with Esther for his life. And the two interesting things, obviously the king misinterprets what's going on here, that he suggests that Haman, having done all the stuff that he's done already, that here is Haman now chatting up his wife, and he's not amused. But of course the other side of that is that here is Haman, who was so annoyed that Mordecai, the Jew, wouldn't acknowledge Haman's presence and wouldn't bow down to Haman. And the idea of Haman ever bowing down to a Jew, we just went against everything in him. And then in the previous chapter, he's having to take part of the honoring of Mordecai. But here he is, he's having to kneel down in front of Esther, the Jew, to plead for his own life. And so there's a total sort of turnaround of what is going on. And it's not successful. His sins are compounded. Not only is he the person who is pushed for the annihilation of the Jews, that Esther is asked can be overturned, but on top of that, the king has got this perception that he is chatting up his wife, propositioning his wife, and so he's hung on the very gallows that he built for Mordecai. Different translations talk about the gallows and the other, and I was trying to see what it actually says on the New Revised Standard Version, but it's gallows in here as well. But another version says a big spike, a huge big high spike, whatever the means of his death, that he is put to death in the place that he had planned, Mordecai. So it's pretty gruesome, but it's gruesome, I think, in a culture where there's lots of gruesome stuff going on. Just any society that can think the annihilation of a whole people group is acceptable, is going to be pretty gruesome. And so if we take away that from the story, we're left with a flowing of different parts of the story where God has his purpose, and the purposes of God and the purposes of man clash, but God's plan is supreme. Tied in with that, there's the whole thing of timing. There's of Esther being put in position of queen for such a time as this, and for Esther having to bide her time and to be sensitive to when is the right time to act, and to wait until she felt God was saying, now is the time, now is the right time to speak out, and God acted. So in the discussion that we might have as the week goes on, we come back again to the whole thing of timing, and how timing touches our lives, and when we interact with God as we grow in our faith. Sometimes we see God's hand active, we see God moving and touching and blessing, and at other times it feels as if he's disappeared off to the wings somewhere, and we don't see him. And of course, that's the setting in this book, really, that God is in the wings, that we don't see him center stage. And often in our lives, it feels as if God isn't center stage. We'd love him to be center stage. So I think we'd love him to be center stage, but he's not there. So I hope we can share some of that this week as we move on with the story. So I wish you all a good week, and emails will be sent out. Please do share any thoughts you have, any insight, any experiences, because we can all learn from each other. And then we'll meet again next Monday evening on Zoom. So have a good week, and may the Lord bless you.